Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. We have our cozy fire in the background to help you fall asleep. And now, on with our story time. The She-Wolf. Breakfast eaten, and the slim camp outfit lashed to the sled. The men turned their backs on the cheery fire and launched out into the darkness. At once began to rise the cries that were fiercely sad, cries that called through the darkness and called to one another and answered back. Conversation ceased. Daylight came at 9 o'clock. At midday, the sky to the south warmed to rose color and marked where the bulge of the earth intervened between the meridian sun and the northern world. But the rose color swiftly faded. The gray light of day that remained lasted until 3 o'clock, when it too faded, and the pall of the Arctic night descended upon the lone and silent land. As darkness came on, the hunting cries to right and left and rear drew closer. So close that more than once they sent surges of fear through the toiling dogs, throwing them into short-lived panics. At the conclusion of one such panic, when Bill and Henry had got the dogs back into the traces, Bill said, "I wish they'd strike game somewheres and go away. Leave us alone." "They do get on the nerves horrible," Henry sympathized. They spoke no more until camp was made. Henry was bending over and adding ice to the babbling pot of beans when he was startled by the sound of a blow. An exclamation from Bill, and a sharp snarling cry of pain from among the dogs. He straightened up in time to see a dim form disappearing across the snow into the shelter of the dark. Then he saw Bill, standing amid the dogs, half triumphant, half crestfallen. In one hand a stout club, in the other the tail and part of the body of a sun-cured salmon. "I got half of it," he announced, "but I got a whack at just the same. Did you hear it squeal?" "What did it look like?" Henry asked. "I couldn't see, but it had 4 legs and a mouth and hair. It looked like any dog." "Maybe it's a tame wolf, I reckon," said Henry. "It's damn tame," said Bill. "Whatever it is, coming in here and feeding time and again, getting its whack of fish." That night, when supper was finished and they sat on the oblong box and pulled on their pipes, the circle of gleaming eyes drew in even closer than before. "I wish they'd spring up a bunch of moose or something. Go away, leave us alone," Bill said. Henry grunted with an intonation that was not all sympathy, and for a quarter of an hour they sat on in silence. Henry staring at the fire, and Bill at the circle of eyes that burned in the darkness just beyond the firelight. "I wish we was pulling into McGurry right now," Bill said. "Shut up, you're wishing and you're croaking," Henry burst out angrily. "Your stomach's sour. That's what's ailing you. Swallow a spoonful of sody and you'll sweeten up wonderful and be more pleasant company." In the morning, Henry was aroused by a fervid blasphemy that proceeded from the mouth of Bill. Henry propped himself up on an elbow and looked to see his comrade standing among the dogs beside the replenished fire, his arms raised in abjuration, his face distorted with passion. "What's up now?" Henry called. "Frog's gone," came the answer. "No." "I tell you yes," said Bill. Henry leaped out of the blankets and to the dogs. He counted them with care, and then joined his partner in cursing the power of the wild, robbing them of another dog. Frog was the strongest of the bunch, Bill pronounced finally. And he was no fool of a dog neither, Henry added. And so was recorded the second epitaph in 2 days. A gloomy breakfast was eaten, and the 4 remaining dogs were harnessed to the sled. The day was a repetition of the days that had gone before. The men toiled without speech across the face of the frozen world. The silence was unbroken, save the cries of their pursuers that, unseen, hung upon their rear. With the coming of night in the mid-afternoon, the cries sounded closer as pursuers drew in according to their custom, and the dogs grew excited and frightened, and were guilty of panics that tangled the traces and further depressed the 2 men. There, that'll fix you fool critters, Bill said with satisfaction that night, standing erect at the completion of his task. Henry left his cooking to come and see. Not only had his partner tied the dogs up, but he had tied them, after the Indian fashion, with sticks. About the neck of each dog, he had fastened a leather thong. To this, and so close to the neck that the dog could not get his teeth to it, he had tied a stout stick 4 or 5 feet in length. The other end of the stick, in turn, was made fast to a stake in the ground by means of a leather thong. The dog was unable to gnaw through the leather at his own end. The stick prevented him from getting at the leather that fastened on the other end. Henry nodded his head approvingly. This is the only contraption that'll ever hold One Ear, Henry said. He can gnaw through leather as clean as a knife and just about half as quick. They'll all be here in the morning, hunky-dory. You bet they will, Bill affirmed. If one of them turns up missing, I'll go without my coffee. They just know we ain't loaded to kill, Henry remarked at bedtime, indicating the gleaming circle that hemmed them in. If we could get a couple of shots into them, they'd be more respectful. They come closer every night. Get the firelight out of your eyes and look hard. There. Do you see that one? For some time, the 2 men amused themselves with watching the movement of the vague forms on the edge of the firelight. By looking closely and steadily at where a pair of eyes burned in the darkness, the form of an animal would slowly take shape. They could even see these forms move at times. The sound among the dogs attracted the men's attention. One Ear was uttering quick, eager whines, lunging at the length of his stick toward the darkness, and desisting now and again in order to make frantic attacks on the stick with his teeth. Look at that, Bill, Henry whispered. Full into the firelight, with a stealthy sidelong movement, glided a dog-like animal. It moved with commingled mistrust and daring, cautiously observing the men, its attention fixed on the dogs. One Ear strained the full length of the stick toward the intruder and whined with eagerness. That fool One Ear don't seem scared much, Bill said in a low tone. It's a she-wolf, Henry whispered back. That accounts for Fatty and Frog. She's a decoy for its pack. She draws out the dog, and then all the rest pitches in and eats 'em up. The fire crackled. The log fell apart with a loud, spluttering noise. At the sound of it, the strange animal leaped back into the darkness. Henry, I'm thinking, Bill said. Thinking what? I'm thinking that was the one I lambasted with the club. Ain't the slightest doubt in the world, was Henry's response. And right here, Bill went on, I want to remark. That animal's familiarity with the campfires is suspicious and immoral. Henry agreed. It knows for certain more a self-respecting wolf ought to know. Wolf that knows enough to come in with the dogs at feeding times. Has experience. Bill returned. Old villain had a dog once that ran away with the wolves. I ought to know. I shot it out of the pack in a moose pasture over on Little Stick. And old villain cried like a baby. I hadn't seen it for 3 years, he said. Been with the wolves all that time. I reckon you've called the turn, Bill. That wolf's a dog, and it's eaten many fish, many times, from the hand of man, Bill declared. And if I get a chance at it, that wolf's just a dog, it'll be meat. We can't afford to lose no more animals. But you've only got 3 cartridges, Henry objected. I'll wait for a dead, sure shot, was the reply. In the morning, Henry renewed the fire and cooked breakfast to the accompaniment of his partner's snoring. He was sleeping too comfortable for anything, Henry told him, as he routed him out for breakfast. I hadn't the heart to rouse you. Bill began to eat sleepily. He noticed that his cup was empty and started to reach for the pot. But the pot was beyond arm's length and beside Henry. Say, Henry, Bill chided gently. Ain't you forgetting something? Henry looked about with great carefulness and shook his head. Bill held up his empty cup. You don't get no coffee, Henry announced. Have we run out? Bill asked anxiously. Nope. Ain't thinking it'll hurt my digestion? Nope. A flush of angry blood pervaded Bill's face. Then it's just warm and anxious I am to be hearing you explain yourself, he said. Spanker's gone, Henry answered. Without haste, with the air of one resigned to misfortune, Bill turned his head, and from where he was, counted the dogs. How'd it happen? He asked. Henry shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. Unless One Ear gnawed him loose. He couldn't have done it himself, that's for sure. The darned cuss. Bill spoke gravely and slowly, with no hint of the anger that was raging within. Just because he couldn't chew himself loose, he chews Spanker loose. Well, said Henry, Spanker's troubles is over anyway. I guess he's digested by this time, cavorting over the landscape in the bellies of 20 different wolves. This was Henry's epitaph, the latest lost dog. Have some coffee, Bill. But Bill shook his head. Go on, Henry pleaded, elevating the pot. Bill shoved his cup aside. I'll be ding-dong-dinged if I do. I said I wouldn't. A dog turned up missing, and I won't. It's darn good coffee, Henry said enticingly. But Bill was stubborn, and he ate dry breakfast washed down with mumbled curses at One Ear for the trick he had played. We'll tie him up out of reach of each other tonight, Bill said, as they took the trail. They had traveled little more than 100 yards when Henry, who was in front, bent down and picked up something with which his snowshoe had collided. It was dark, and he could not see it. He recognized it by the touch. He flung it back, so it struck the sled and bounced along until it fetched up on Bill's snowshoes. Maybe you'll need that in your business, Henry said. Bill uttered an exclamation. It was all that was left of Spanker, the stick with which he had been tied. They ate him, hide and all, Bill said. The stick's clean as a whistle. They've ate the leather off both ends. They're damn hungry, Henry. And they'll have you and me guessing before this trip's over. Henry laughed defiantly. I ain't been trailed this way by wolves before. but I've gone through a whole lot worse and kept my health. Takes more than a handful of them pesky critters to do for yours truly, Bill, my son. I don't know, Bill muttered ominously. Well, said Henry, you'll know all right when we pull into McCurry. Bill persisted. I ain't feeling special enthusiastic. Henry said, you're off color. That's what's the matter with you. What you need is quinine, and I'm going to dose you as soon as we make McCurry. Bill grunted his disagreement with the diagnosis and lapsed into silence. The day was like all the days. Light came at 9 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, the southern horizon was warmed by the unseen sun, and then began the cold gray of afternoon that would merge, 3 hours later, into the night. It was just after the sun's futile effort to appear that Bill slipped the rifle from under the sled lashings and said, You keep right on, Henry. I'm going to see what I can see. Henry protested. You'd better stick by the sled, Bill. You've only got 3 cartridges, and there's no telling what might happen. Who's afraid now? Bill demanded triumphantly. Henry made no reply. He plodded along, though often he cast anxious glances back into the gray solitude where his partner had disappeared. An hour later, taking advantage of the cut-offs around which the sled had gone, Bill arrived. They're scattered and ranging along wide, Bill said, keeping up with us and looking for game at the same time. You see, they're sure of us, only they know they've got to wait to get us. In the meantime, they're willing to pick up anything eatable that comes handy. Henry objected. You mean they think they're sure of us? But Bill ignored him. I seen some of 'em. They're pretty thin. They ain't had a bite in weeks, I reckon, outside of Fatty and Frog and Spanker. And there's so many of 'em that didn't go far. They're remarkable thin. Their ribs is like washboards, and their stomachs is right up against their backbones. They're pretty desperate, I can tell you. They'll be going mad, yet. And then, watch out. A few minutes later, Henry, who was now traveling behind the sled, emitted a low warning. Bill turned and looked, and quietly stopped the dogs. To the rear, from around the last bend and plainly into view, was the very trail they had just covered. Trotted a furry, slinking form. Its nose was to the trail, and it trotted with a peculiar, sliding, effortless gait. When they halted, it halted, throwing up its head and regarding them steadily with nostrils that twitched as it caught and studied the scent of them. It's the she-wolf, Bill answered. The dogs had lain down in the snow, and he walked past them to join his partner in the sled. Together they watched the strange animal that had pursued them for days, and that had already accomplished the destruction of half their dog team. After a searching scrutiny, the animal trotted forward a few steps. Thus it repeated several times, till it was a short 100 yards away. It paused, head up, close by a clump of spruce trees, and with sight and scent studied the outfit of the watching men. It looked at them in a strangely wistful way, after the manner of a dog. But in its wistfulness there was none of the dog affection. It was a wistfulness bred of hunger, as cruel as its own fangs, as merciless as the frost itself. It was large for a wolf, its gaunt frame advertising the lines of an animal that was among the largest of its kind. Stands pretty close to 2.5 feet at the shoulders, Henry commented. And I'll bet it ain't far from 5 feet long. Kind of a strange color for a wolf, was Bill's criticism. I never seen a red wolf before. Looks almost cinnamon to me. The animal was certainly not cinnamon-colored. Its coat was the true wolf coat. The dominant color was gray, and yet there was to it a faint, reddish hue. A hue that was baffling, that appeared and disappeared. That was more like an illusion of a vision, now gray, distinctly gray, and again giving hints and glints of a vague redness of color, not classifiable in terms of ordinary experience. Bill said, "Looks for all the world like a big husky sled dog. I wouldn't be surprised to see it wag its tail." "Hello, you husky," he called. "Come here, whatever your name is." Henry laughed. "Ain't a bit scared of you." Bill waved his hand at it threateningly and shouted loudly. But the animal betrayed no fear. The only change in it was an ascension of alertness. It still regarded them with the merciless wistfulness of hunger. They were meat, and it was hungry, and it would like to go in and eat them if it dared. "Look here, Henry," Bill said, unconsciously lowering his voice to a whisper because of what he imitated. "We've got 3 cartridges, but it's a dead shot. Couldn't miss it. It's got away with 3 of our dogs, and we ought to put a stop to it. What do you say?" Henry nodded his consent. Bill cautiously slipped the gun from under the sled lashing. The gun was on the way to his shoulder, but it never got there. For in that instant the she-wolf leaped sideways from the trail into the clump of spruce trees and disappeared. The 2 men looked at each other. Henry whistled long and comprehendingly. "I might have known it," Bill chided himself aloud as he replaced the gun. Of course, a wolf that knows enough to come with the dogs at feeding time didn't know all about shooting irons. I tell you right now, Henry, that critter's the cause of all our trouble. We'd have 6 dogs at the present time, instead of 3, if it wasn't for her. And I tell you right now, Henry, I'm gonna get her. She's too smart to be shot in the open, but I'm going to lay ground for her. I'll bushwhack her as sure as my name is Bill." Henry admonished, "You needn't stray off too far in doing it. If that pack ever starts to jump you, those 3 cartridges be worth no more than 3 whoops in hell. Them animals is damn hungry, and once they start in, they'll get you, Bill." They camped early that night. 3 dogs could not drag the sled so fast, nor for so long hours as could 6, and they were showing unmistakable signs of playing out. And the men went early to bed, Bill first seeing to it that the dogs were tied and out of reach of gnawing anything for one another. But the wolves were growing bolder, and the men were aroused more than once from their sleep. So near did the wolves approach that the dogs became frantic with terror, and it was necessary to replenish the fire from time to time in order to keep the adventurous marauders at a safer distance. "I've heard sailors talk of sharks following a ship," Bill remarked as he crawled back into the blankets after one such replenishing of the fire. "Well, them wolves is land sharks. They know their business better'n we do, and they ain't a holdin' our trail this way for their hell. They're gonna get us. They're gonna get us, Henry." Henry retorted, "They've half got you already, talking like that. A man's half licked when he says he is, and you're half eaten from the way you're going on about it." Bill answered, "They've got away with better men than you and me. Henry responded. Oh, shut up your croaking. You make me all fired tired. Henry rolled over angrily on his side, but was surprised that Bill made no similar display of temper. This was not Bill's way, for he was easily angered by sharp words. Henry thought long over it before he went to sleep, and as his eyelids fluttered down and he dozed off, the thought in his mind was, there's no mistaking it. Bill's almighty blue. I'll have to cheer him up tomorrow. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams.